In the dust-choked valleys of a war-torn land, where every shadow could conceal an ambush and every sound might signal the start of an attack, a team of Navy SEALs prepared for what looked like another desperate mission. The soldiers had been pinned down for days by an unseen sniper hidden somewhere across the jagged ridges, a threat that had already claimed lives and stalled operations. Among them stood Lieutenant Sarah Collins, a woman whose presence on the battlefield often drew skeptical glances. Though she carried the weight of her uniform and training with absolute confidence, whispers always followed her. Questions about whether she could hold her own in a fight dominated by men hardened by years of combat. What they didn't realize was that Sarah had been shaped by studying the legends. She read every lesson left behind by Chris Kyle, America's most lethal sniper, and had modeled her precision on the patient endurance of Carlos Hathcock and Craig Harrison. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The day's mission seemed hopeless. Insurgents had dug in across the valley, cutting off the only supply route for Allied forces. With machine gun nests hidden in caves and the dreaded sniper keeping American forces from moving, casualties were mounting. Soldiers crouched low, trapped behind broken walls, their radios buzzing with desperate calls for support. The general, a seasoned Navy SEAL who had seen battles on every continent, scanned the horizon through his binoculars, his jaw clenched. He knew the fight could not be won without neutralizing the sniper, yet even the most skilled shooters among his men had failed to locate the hidden threat. The oppressive heat and the heavy silence of fear hung over the group like a suffocating fog. Sarah sat calmly, her eyes fixed on the distant ridges. Unlike the others, she didn't fidget or curse the situation. Her mind was working, calculating, remembering the wind drift charts she had memorized, the ballistic arcs she had rehearsed thousands of times. Her reputation for patience had earned her respect among some of the younger SEALs. But to the veterans, she was still unproven, a soldier who had yet to deliver in the chaos of true combat. That doubt seemed to hang in the air until the general himself turned toward her. He studied her expression, the calm steadiness in her gaze, and then, without a word, stepped forward and placed a massive Barrett M82 50 caliber sniper rifle into her hands. The weapon was more than steel and firepower. It was a test of will. The Barrett was the kind of rifle capable of tearing through armored plates, the same weapon that had earned legends their reputations. Sarah felt the weight settle against her shoulder, and with it the unspoken challenge from the general. Prove to us that courage is not bound by gender or doubt. Around her, the other soldiers exchanged glances, some skeptical, others silently hopeful. No one spoke, but the air was thick with anticipation. She crawled forward, finding her vantage point behind a slab of broken concrete, and set up her scope. Through the glass, the ridges stretched endlessly, the rocks shimmering in the desert sun. Somewhere out there was the enemy sniper, patient, ruthless, and deadly. Her breathing slowed. She tuned out the chaos behind her, the shouted orders, the thud of distant mortars, and focused only on the crosshairs. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she began to adjust for distance, 1.96 miles, the kind of shot most called impossible. The seconds ticked by. Her calculations ran through her mind like a silent mantra. Wind speed from the left, bullet drop, air density. The faintest glint betrayed movement far on the ridge, just for an instant, a reflection off a scope. Her heart beat once, heavy and slow, then steadied into rhythm. She whispered softly, almost to herself, words she had read in Hathcock's memoirs. The enemy always makes a mistake. And she knew she had just seen it. The Barrett roared. The explosion of sound echoed across the valley, rattling rocks and ears alike. Soldiers ducked instinctively, then turned to follow the invisible arc of the shot. Time stretched impossibly long. For 10 endless seconds, it felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. Then, a figure crumpled on the far ridge. Silence swept through the valley, the gunfire that had trapped them suddenly cut short. The impossible shot had landed. The sniper who had terrorized them was gone. For a moment, no one spoke. The men looked at each other, disbelief etched in their eyes. Then a cheer erupted, raw and unrestrained, echoing against the mountainsides. Sarah lowered the rifle slowly, her expression calm, almost serene, though her heart thundered in her chest. She had done it, the shot that would not only save her unit, but also rewrite her place in their eyes forever. The general approached, his boots crunching on gravel, his face unreadable. He stopped in front of her, staring at the young lieutenant who had just accomplished a feat that would enter military legend. Slowly, with deliberate respect, he produced the elite sniper badge, an honor reserved for those who had demonstrated extraordinary marksmanship under impossible conditions. He pinned it to her uniform, his voice carrying through the hushed ranks. "Lieutenant Collins, today you've joined the company of legends." Her name began to spread through the ranks in whispers, carried across radio chatter and campfire conversations. Soldiers spoke of her shot in the same breath as Chris Kyle's records and Carlos Hathcock's daring missions. She was no longer the woman who had to prove herself. She was the sniper who made the impossible real. And though she carried the badge with quiet pride, she knew what it truly meant, that courage was not measured by doubt, nor by the expectations of others, but by the willingness to face the impossible and still pull the trigger. As night fell, over the valley and the stars emerged above the battlefield, Sarah sat with her rifle across her lap, watching the horizon with steady eyes. Somewhere out there, another challenge was waiting, and when it came, she knew she would be ready. The legend of the 1.96-mile shot had only just begun. The mountains were silent except for the distant thunder of artillery, each shell shaking the ground and filling the air with dust. A platoon of Marines huddled behind jagged rocks, trapped in a valley where every move invited destruction. They had been fighting for days in a rugged Afghan pass, their supply lines cut and their morale nearly shattered. Each attempt to push forward had been met with the same deadly precision, the enemy's spotter high on the cliffs, directing fire with chilling accuracy. Without silencing him, survival was a fading hope. Among the soldiers crouched Sergeant Emily Parker, her hands steady despite the chaos. She wasn't just another operator in camouflage. She was known among her peers for a calmness that unsettled even the most hardened veterans. Her history was whispered about in hushed tones, years of grueling training under joint programs where she studied the ballistic mastery of Rob Furlong, the endurance of Adrian Carton de Wiart, and the patience of Craig Harrison, who once held the world record for the longest sniper kill. She wasn't here to prove herself. She was here to survive, and to ensure others did too. The Marines around her ducked lower as another artillery strike hit dangerously close, scattering rock fragments across their cover. Radios crackled with panic, voices begging for air support that would not come in time. The general, a battle-hardened Navy SEAL who had led operations across deserts and oceans, stood tall despite the danger. His face was grim, his binoculars trained on the distant cliffs where the enemy spotter lay hidden like a ghost. He knew that without eliminating that spotter, his men wouldn't last another hour. The general turned slowly, his gaze landing on Emily. Unlike the others, she wasn't cursing or shouting into a radio. Her breathing was measured, her eyes fixed on the cliffs as if she could already see through the rock and dust to the figure pulling their strings of destruction. In that moment, he remembered the legends, Chris Kyle taking impossible shots, Carlos Hathcock crawling for days to eliminate a single target, Furlong calculating a ballistic arc that seemed insane. Something in Emily's stillness reminded him of them. With a silent nod, he slung his own Barrett .50 caliber rifle from his shoulder, the weapon gleaming with battle-worn scratches, and placed it in her hands. "You know what to do," he said, his voice low but carrying enough authority to silence the panic around them. "Make it count." The Marines turned to look, disbelief flickering in their eyes. Some muttered under their breath, entrusting. Everything to her seemed reckless, even desperate. But the general's faith silenced their doubts. Emily adjusted the massive weapon, its weight pressing against her shoulder like the burden of every soul crouched in fear around her. She crawled to a position that gave her a sliver of view through the valley, laying flat on the jagged ground. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a tunnel of dust, rock, and light. She scanned every ridge, every shadow, searching for the faintest sign of movement. The artillery fire paused, then resumed, evidence that the spotter was still alive, still guiding destruction down upon them. She whispered calculations under her breath: elevation, wind speed, humidity. The target was nearly 2 miles away, 1.96 miles. The shot bordered on fantasy. Even the best marksman in history hesitated at such a distance. But hesitation was a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought back to the teachings of those who had walked the path before her. Furlong's record-breaking, shot across the mountains of Afghanistan. Craig Harrison's patience in Iraq, waiting for the perfect wind conditions. Carlos Hathcock's legendary crawl through hostile jungle to deliver a single bullet that changed the course of a battle. Their names carried weight, but now the responsibility was hers. Her finger rested on the trigger, but she did not fire. She waited, breathing slow, letting her heartbeat align with the rhythm of the earth. Then she saw it, barely a shimmer, the faint reflection of glass on the cliffside. The enemy spotter had made a mistake, however small. She inhaled deeply, adjusted her scope for the last time, and squeezed. The Barrett roared like thunder, splitting the sky. The recoil drove into her shoulder, the sound echoing across the valley, but her eyes never left the scope. She tracked the invisible path of the bullet in her mind, every calculation converging into that one perfect arc. For nearly 10 seconds, the world seemed frozen, all sound and fear suspended. Then, through the magnified lens, she saw the figure on the ridge fall. The reflection of the scope vanished. The enemy spotter was gone. For a long moment, silence ruled the battlefield. The artillery stopped. The Marines blinked in disbelief, their ears still ringing from the shot, their minds struggling to accept what had just happened. And then, slowly, realization spread. A cheer rose, hesitant at first, then swelling into a roar that echoed against the cliffs. Soldiers clapped each other on the back, some sinking to their knees in relief, others shouting her name. Emily lowered the rifle, her hands steady though her chest ached with the weight of what she had just done. Around her, the fear had shifted into awe. She had turned the tide of a battle with a single shot. The general walked to her side, his boots crunching on shattered stone. He looked down at her with an expression that carried both respect and pride. From a pouch on his vest, he drew out the 1.96-mile elite sniper badge, a decoration so rare, it bordered on myth. Kneeling beside her, he pinned it to her uniform. "You've done what most wouldn't even attempt," he said, his voice steady. "Today you've joined the legends." The badge gleamed faintly in the harsh sun, but to Emily it felt heavier than the Barrett itself. She hadn't sought glory. She hadn't needed validation. Yet in this moment she understood that the shot would be remembered not only by those she saved, but also by those who would hear the story years later. Word of her feat traveled fast, carried by radio transmissions, whispered in camps, retold with awe in barracks. Soldiers began to speak her name alongside Kyle, Hathcock, Harrison, and Furlong. But unlike them, she carried another layer of weight, the reminder that courage wasn't defined by expectations or doubts. It was defined by action in the face of impossibility. As dusk fell over the valley, the Marines began to move forward, no longer trapped by the enemy's iron grip. The air was alive with renewed determination, every man and woman lifted by the miracle of survival. Emily stayed at the rear, her eyes on the ridges, scanning for any sign of danger. Her finger brushed lightly against the badge pinned to her chest. She thought of the countless sacrifices that had led to this moment, of the warriors who had come before, and of those who still fought unseen battles. Her story was not just about a shot across miles of hostile terrain. It was about the resilience of those who refused to surrender, about the courage to stand against impossible odds. And as the stars emerged in the Afghan night, Emily lay beside her rifle, knowing the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more impossible moments, more times when courage would be tested. But she no longer carried the burden of doubt. She carried the knowledge that when the world seemed impossible, one bullet, delivered with precision and resolve, could change everything. The legend of Sergeant Emily Parker's 1.96-mile shot became more than a battlefield tale. It became a reminder whispered to every soldier stepping into the unknown. Courage knows no boundaries, and sometimes history is written in the span of 10 silent seconds.